our solar system and the planets, it's all energy. We are energy. It's all just about energetic expression. And so we see that energetic expression happening in very practical, real world, tangible ways, but we don't necessarily connect it to maybe the natural world or to what's happening in the sky or to anything else. We just go about our days being like, yeah, well, real estate picks up in spring. Well, why is that? Right?
Mhm. Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
or if people are like, yeah, spring break, let's go. Why is that? Right? Like there's all these things that if you start thinking about them differently, it's like, got it. Because the energy is there to do something, to move, to start shifting from where we were in winter.
Welcome back to Soul Snacks. Today we're talking about something that I think a lot of us feel but don't always pay attention to. It's that shift that happens this time of year right around the spring equinox. We're going to talk about what the spring equinox actually is, why it might matter more than we think, and what it looks like to move through the season with a little more intention and a lot less pressure. So let's get into it. Hi, Becca. How are ya?
Hi, Cami. I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm great, and I am really excited for this episode because, truth be told, I don't really know anything about the spring equinox. I certainly feel a shift every spring, but I don't really know what it is or why I feel that way. So I think this is going to be a great conversation, and I know that this is something that you do and are super passionate about. So I'm excited for this.
I am too. I didn't realize how important spring was to me and how the themes and the associations and all sorts of stuff were something that I even really noticed. But then when we were planning our wedding and we were picking dates and whatnot, we actually ended up getting married on the spring equinox because of the symbolism and the associations and the energy that come around with it and all sorts of stuff. So it is not only is it stuff that I do in my work and whatnot, but it's also something that I think personally has a lot of significance for me. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
okay. So, all right. So, okay, you mentioned you got married during the spring equinox. So, is it actually a specific day or date of the year, or is it like a time period that kicks off that kind of moves along? I guess just tell me what it is. Like, what actually is the spring equinox and what is happening when it's going on?
Yeah. So the spring equinox is it's an exact thing that happens in the sky, right? And most of the time it happens around a similar date, but it's not always like the exact same date. It's usually like 19th, 20th, 21st of March. But it always happens the equinox itself is happening at an exact time. And what that means is that, if you take the tilt of the earth into consideration, right? The earth is always moving around the sun. But that tilt never changes, like how it never goes like, oh, it's tilting towards the left and then tilts towards the right or whatever. It's always tilted at that 23.5 degrees. But because of the rotation, that's where it ends up changing our relation to the sun. So
Oh.
like in winter, excuse me, in the Northern Hemisphere, we're tilted away from the sun, which is why we have shorter days and such
Oh,
in the Northern Hemisphere, right?
yeah. Okay.
The Southern Hemisphere is tilted towards the sun. So they have summer at that point. When you go 180 degrees around and then we're tilted towards the sun, that's when we have our summer. Southern Hemisphere has their winter. So the spring equinox is when we're in like it's one of the two positions, right? You have the spring equinox and the autumn equinox, where because the tilt is not necessarily facing towards or away from the sun, it's just kind of neutral in a way towards the sun, where the sun is hitting the basically half of the planet in equal measure, essentially. So
Hmm.
that's why it is half day, half night. So there's like, some astronomy to it. There is some science that, is the thing. But historically speaking, and when I say historically, I'm not just talking like in recent years. I'm talking like thousands and thousands of years ago. before we had the adaptation of like the calendars that we have now, right? Before we had the Gregorian calendar, which is the one that we have now, there was the Julian calendar. And before that, there was the Roman calendar. And before that, there's all these different interpretations of these man made calendars. But they all started because these ancient cultures, specifically like the Babylonians, back and maybe even before that, honestly. But these are like 3,000, 4,000 BC, we're tracking the sky and what was happening in the natural world around them, and starting to put like pen to paper in a way, even though it was more like scribe to stone, on what was happening around them. And so the Babylonians specifically had a New Year celebration that happened in March, and then they started to see like, okay, here's what the sky is doing as well. And so um it was because these cultures were tracking, like they were agricultural, that was the only way they had to track this cycle of
Mm.
life on the planet. And so that's, it's a much deeper history than that. But in a way, that's kind of what started this like March association with this spring equinox, with this time of renewal, with this new beginning, with this new year, that sort of a thing, which is a lot of the themes. And I know we'll get into it, but a lot of the themes and stuff that we see around the spring equinox nowadays.
Well, yeah, and it actually makes perfect sense to me too, because it seems like everything starts to come alive, right? In late March,
Totally.
early April, you start to see the crocuses popping up. You see the daffodils starting to come up out of the soil.
Hmm.
The leaves on the trees are starting to bud up. Like there's all this stuff happening. So, and I know you've mentioned an astrological new year before
Hmm.
versus, the Gregorian calendar new year. Um, but it does feel more significant than January 1st. It just
Totally.
seems like there's so much more going on.
Yeah.
So, like, what do you think that means? And how can you speak to, like, that piece of it?
Yeah. Well, and I think, I always want to be cognizant of like where people are, right? Like we're in Michigan, we get 4 seasons. So a lot of what we're going to talk about, we can very much picture we're in, it is our reality. But I think no matter where people are at, there's still probably some level of seasonality to things, right? Like even if you're down in the Caribbean or in Central America, there's like a rainy season versus the dry season. There's still some seasonality. But you're totally right. Like January for us is cold, it's dark, it's gray. It's the time, and we talked about this on our wintering episode. It's the time when nature is literally like hibernating, right? It's
Mhm.
going dormant. There's not a lot of stuff that is out there like living its best life or coming into bloom or doing anything like that because it's that restful period. So then you get to spring and you start to feel that, right? The days, we know for a fact scientifically the days get longer, right?
Mhm.
The earth starts to warm up, the snow starts to melt, and again, this goes back to the astronomy, right? And the rotation of the placement of the earth rotating around the sun and such. But so when we naturally start to see the world around us come alive, right? Things start to bloom. The birds come back from migrating south to where they were staying warm over the winter. And we as humans start to feel that too. And so for a lot of people, like the calendars that we have now, most of them were adapted for more of like political societal reasons, right? It
Mhm.
wasn't I shouldn't say it wasn't, but and since then, in some ways, I feel like that has done a disservice to us being able to kind of live by the seasons, right? Because of this thing where January like starts a new year, right? Where do we really feel like going out there and tackling our goals and doing all the things in January? Probably not. Um, so the spring equinox, so now if we start looking at the astrological significance, right? Because the Babylonians were also the ones who really created astrology, right? Created the zodiac after tracking the movement of the moon and the sun through these constellations and such. Um, so they're really the ones that started to sync up this astrological new year with the spring equinox with this time of year. And if you think about, like, to your point, what we start seeing happening around us with the crocuses blooming, the trees starting to bud out, all that stuff, it does kind of make more sense.
So we had like the winter solstice and
Hmm.
then the spring equinox. Is this kind of something that happens like once a quarter, if you're looking at a 12-year cycle? Because then in the fall, we're probably going to have the fall. I don't know if it's the equinox or the no, there's going to be the summer solstice. And then
Yep.
I'm assuming the fall equinox
Yep.
will happen. So, and I know we'll talk about those too, but
Yeah.
so it really follows like an every 3-month cycle or so, right?
Yeah. So that's so real quick. So the equinox, like equinox actually means equal night, right?
Mm,
So when the spring and fall or spring and autumn are always the equinoxes because
okay.
the whole thing with the spring and autumn, that's when we have equal daylight and equal night.
Oh,
So, and
okay.
then the solstices are winter and summer. So you're right. There are, so these, you have the four different, seasonal, just call them seasonal celebrations at this point. Cause they are like days that I try to clear my calendar and celebrate and honor and whatnot. But they start every season, right? So the spring equinox kicks off spring officially for us. The summer solstice kicks off summer. The autumn equinox kicks off the season of fall, and then the winter solstice will kick off the season of winter. And each season is 3 months long.
Okay.
But within each season, we also know that there are different seasons, right? Like if we kick off the beginning of spring in March, that feels a lot different than spring in May, even though May is still spring, right? Because we don't start celebrating summer until June
Right.
officially.
Right.
So there's different seasons, different seasonality within those bigger seasons. And that's part of where the astrological piece comes in too, and some of these other seasonal celebrations. So, like the astrological new year kicks off on the spring equinox and it starts with the sign of Aries. And so again, these ancient cultures were, they'd been tracking the constellations, and a lot of the time they associated these constellations and the personalities and the traits of them with, most of the time it was gods in their culture, right? And then as astrology moved through, it was adapted. Like the Greeks ended up putting a lot of their mythology and their gods to it. So when people are like, oh, astrology is just like this pseudoscience and it's all about horoscopes and personalities and whatnot, a lot of the associations come from these ancient cultures and the embodiment and the traits and the mythology of these gods and these significant figures in their cultures. So when you start with the astrological year in Aries, though, like Aries is the first season of spring. And then you have the second season of spring, which is going to be Taurus. And then you have the third season of spring, which is going to be the Gemini season. And each one of those is about 30 days. And so those three seasons collectively make up the season of spring. And if you start looking at those, if the associations and the pieces within each of those zodiac or astrological seasons, you start to really notice how the natural world is also mirroring the energy of those, which is why we feel different in Aries season at the beginning of spring, right? Than we do in Gemini season at the end of spring, when we're actually kind of starting to get more towards summer.
That's so
That kind of,
interesting. Yeah, that's so interesting to me. So, because I think about like Aries is a fire sign, right?
yep,
So it's
yep.
kicking off like with all of this, like this full force, coming in at us. And then by the time you get to the end, it's kind of slowly starting to like maybe chill a little bit. And then
Mhm.
and then once you get past Gemini season, then you kick Cancer season comes in, and Cancer's all about emotion and water, and it's a water sign. So it's like you get the fire, you get the what is it, the earth, and then you
Taurus
get
is
the
Earth, yep.
and then you get the air, and then you get the water, and it just kind of follows like those types of cycles. And if you think about it from like an emotional or element standpoint, you are getting like all of these different emotional uh vibes that are kind of
Mhm.
happening throughout any season,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, no, I love that you brought up the elements because the elements are one of like the foundational pieces that connect it all too, right? So every season, every natural season has I'm talking about like the four kind of traditional elements based on different schools of thought, different cultures. Some people find there's five elements, or whatnot, but I'm talking about like the four traditional elements: earth, air, fire, water. So
Mhm.
every season has an associated element to it. And every astrological sign or season has an element to it. And you're right. It's, fire, earth, air, water. And then it basically starts to repeat fire, air, earth, water. And it does that 3 times. So there are 4 different elements, and there are 3 different zodiac signs for each element. So you mentioned Aries being a fire sign, right? Aries is the sign that kicks off spring. It is the initiator. It's this instigator. It's this independent, like, I'm going to go and, I always laugh because when I think about embodying the traits of Aries, I always think of my little sister. She is like such an Aries in like the best way. But so I'm always like, okay, like let's think about her. But at the same time, like you have Aries as a fire sign, you have Leo as a fire sign, and then you have Sagittarius as a fire sign. They're all different in how they feel, right? And how they
Mhm.
express themselves. So Aries, yes, is this instigator, and it initiates things, and it is like, hey, I'm this independent leader in a way. But it's also at the beginning of spring. So, and I think because we're in this human experience, right, that we have to be mindful of how this can actually show up in our day to day. And I think the last thing we need is to be putting more pressure on ourselves to go out and do anything. So like, again, let's take just Aries, for example. This is happening, like, it is still gross out, right? Like,
Ugh.
we're literally
Yeah.
recording it the week that this is coming out. Usually we record a couple weeks in advance. We're recording this the week that this comes out. Northern Michigan is under ice right now, and or 40 inches of snow, and or I know up in Traverse City they got 18 inches of snow. Like, it's gross weather
It's
right now.
brutal.
It is
Yeah.
gross. It's not like Aries season kicks off and we're like, "Oh my gosh, it's spring, everything's blooming. This is what's." It's like the slow start. It is the buds, or like the daffodils are starting to poke up through the ground, but it's still cold, right? It's
Mhm.
not like they're ready to bloom just yet. They're just starting to poke up through the soil. They're starting to like stretch and grow taller towards the sun. And that energy is something to like be mindful of, but it's not that we're going like full speed ahead yet. And that's what I mean when we talk about the different seasons within the seasons, right? Because this first season of spring, when the equinox happens and spring is officially here, it's like that gentle transition into the season, right? We know it's spring now. We know what to expect. We feel that energetically. Like, everybody's ready for it, right? Like,
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
we've been through the snow, we've been through the cold, we've been through the gray, and we're ready for that. But it's also this like soft transition into it. It's not just guns blazing, go for it, like let's make moves. It's a lot, it just can be gentler than that.
Well, when I think about spring too, and I just I love spring because it does make me feel energized. We're
Yeah.
getting more sunlight, and a lot
Yeah.
of times you go out for walks and you start to see the buds on the trees and the birds are singing, and you just feel naturally more energized. Like
Yeah.
it just kind of rolls in. But I assume there's probably people out there that don't feel as energized as, we think we should in spring.
Mhm.
Why do you think that is? Like
Mhm.
like if there are people who are still kind of stuck in like that that ugh, I just don't want to do anything phase that kind of happens around the winter time when it's dark and you just want to sit inside under a
Mhm.
blanket and a fire and a cup of coffee and eat comfort food. Like w- why do you think it's harder for some people to get out of that mode and into more of a energized spring,
Mhm.
feeling?
Well, I think that goes back to the transition piece, right? Like, we've just spent the last 3 months allowing ourselves to slow down and allowing ourselves to rest, hopefully, allowing ourselves to be a little bit more introspective, to tap into maybe how we're feeling, to like, that's the point of winter. And so spring is like, again, we on the calendar and based on where the, earth is in rotation to the sun, we mark it as a date and as a start time. But our human experience and the natural world also says differently. Like, the buds are not like, oh, spring equinox, I have to bloom today. Let's go. You know what I mean? There's a natural progression to get into spring. So this if the spring equinox turn comes around or Aries season is like the first couple weeks and people are like, yeah, I'm just getting my bearings here around spring. Like, yes, I know it's happening. And yes, maybe I'm starting to feel that, but we still might be under 4 feet of snow. So it might not feel like peak spring energy right now. Well, they're not supposed to. Like, peak spring energy actually happens in Taurus season, like halfway through Taurus season. That's like the peak of spring. Because again, if we think about spring being 3 months, then you're basically looking at about 6 weeks being the halfway point of each season. So that peak spring energy isn't even happening for another 6 weeks. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And there's different cultural celebrations that honor that. So like the ancient Celts back in the day, they were honoring Beltane, or what's kind of now known as May Day, around May 1st, right? Because that's when it was like, oh, spring is really here, right? This is the peak of spring now. We're 6 weeks into spring. And now it really feels like tulips are blooming and all these other things are blooming and blossoms
Mhm.
on the trees are like peeking out and the days are even longer. So to your point, like, it's okay if you don't feel like spring is here and I'm ready for the energy and whatnot, because there's a transition to it. So I don't think, I mean, that's one of the things where it's like we don't need to put more pressure on ourselves to go and feel like spring is here because the spring equinox kicks off. Um, it's a slow build up to like the thick of the season. And I also think that personally speaking, everybody has a different birth chart for astrology. And based on where planets and placements and the relationships of things happen in your birth chart, which is essentially a snapshot of the sky when you were born, that's also going to show up for people. So if some people are like, yeah, spring is like not really my jam, not really where my energy is at, I don't necessarily align with all of this like spring and new beginnings and like, renewal and whatever, that's okay because maybe in their chart, there's like some tricky stuff that happens at that point. Or maybe it's a part where there's like a lot of other energy happening and that takes, kind of precedence. So I think there's a couple things. I think it can be very personal, right? And then I also think that we need to be mindful that it's a transition. Like any of the seasons, they're not set things, right? Like we are the ones who kind of set these calendar days because that's how our society works. Um, but the reality is that they're shifts, they're cycles, right? They layer onto one another, they build onto one another, they grow from one another, right? So like even this spring hopefully feels different than last spring because we've just had a whole year of seasons since we celebrated this last spring. And so there's things that we've gone through. There's layers that we've built in our lives. Maybe there's things that we've let go of, things that we've changed. So this spring can feel like something new because we're taking everything from the last year, all of these other seasons, and now we're thinking about what do we need to compost, right? What can we not take with us? And what do we want to carry forward with us into this time where the energy does support this fresh perspective, this
Mhm.
new growth, right? This new beginning, this rebirth, like renewal, rejuvenation, starting anew sort of thing.
Wow. I never really I don't think I ever really paid attention to seasons before until you and I started talking about them. Like, we did our wintering episode, and this was the first year in my entire life where I actually allowed myself to slow down a little bit and to just kind of like embrace the winter, the cold, the dark. I didn't like pressure myself to keep driving and going, and I kind of took a little bit of a break. But I feel like because I've been able to do that, I do feel more energized now. Like I feel like I'm ready to get going, probably more so than I have in the past. And I think it's
Mhm.
super interesting to think about our calendar in a different way, right? Because time is so linear for us, and we have
Mhm.
these calendars and they're set a certain way for certain reasons. But I think there really is something to nature's course of action and the time in which things happen, right? And
Mhm.
how it affects us as a human species. Um, if you so from a practical standpoint, if you had to tell somebody like who, because I'm sure there's a handful of people who are listeners of ours who are into astrology and really know a lot more about this than most people. But from a practical standpoint, what would you say it looks like to work with spring? Like, how should we be working with spring as it's unfolding and happening?
Mhm. Well, I think to your point, so before I answer that, like I said before, and to what you just said, like you've never really paid attention to the seasons. And I think part of that is because we don't necessarily always have the time to, or like we are living busy lives with a lot of responsibilities. Um, and our society doesn't necessarily honor them in the way that they once did. And so I don't think you're alone. I think generally speaking, there's a lot about that I'm sure aside from seeing them, like, oh, we know it's spring because the snow starts to melt and things happen. We know it's fall because it starts to get colder, the leaves change color. Like we can witness it. And honestly, sometimes that is enough. Like from a practical standpoint, working with the seasons sometimes is really just being intentional about noticing them. Um, I have I love, don't get me wrong, I love the aesthetic look of like seasonal living where
Mm.
everyone is like living on the land and they're growing their own food and they're, having rituals or walking around in linen dresses and all the things and whatever. I love that. Full disclosure, there's part of me that wants to live that. You know what I mean? Um, but there is also sometimes have an issue with that because it makes it feel like it's so untouchable and inaccessible for other people, right? Like you don't have to live on acres of land to feel like you are seasonally living, right? You don't have to be buying your produce from a local growers. Great if you can, right? But that doesn't have to be the thing if that's not realistic for you. And so when it comes to practically working with the seasons, sometimes I do just think as a very basic level, it's notice them.
Mm.
And like really take there's sometimes where it's all I can do in a day is like, hey, when I'm on a walk with the dog, I'm just looking to see what's starting to grow, what plants my neighbors have in their landscaping, or it's just feeling like step outside for the first time. Like, how does the air feel today?
Mhm.
It doesn't need to be anything crazy if you don't have the time for it. Noticing things can be enough. But I would suspect when you start noticing, you start also layering in how you're feeling when you notice things, right? It's, oh, okay, when the weather starts to warm up, how am I feeling compared to whether when it was cold and gray? Um, so like there's some really basic ways that people can work with it. And also you can go so much deeper into all of it, right? There's like, I have an altar in my house where I change it out based on the season as just like this, like little appreciation and recognition where, okay, things are changing seasonally, like bringing plants in or flowers or whatever based on the season, eating fruits, eating foods that are more seasonal. So there's a lot of practical things you can do that you're probably already doing, right? So not to add more, but that you can just start paying attention to a little bit differently, you know? And sometimes that's the easiest, most accessible way to start something. Notice it and then see if there's something you're already doing that maybe it's like, hey, I can shift this up a little bit instead, right? Um, I love Trader Joe's. Okay. They're great. But like they've had peonies in already. Peonies are not a flower that bloom in Michigan here in March. Even tulips don't bloom here in March. Nothing's really blooming here in March except for maybe some crocuses. So just little things like that, like if I'm going to buy flowers, can I buy something that's actually in season right now instead of something that's actually further along?
Mm.
But you know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's just like
Mhm.
little things like that.
Mhm.
Or if people want to go like I said, there's these seasonal celebrations, right? Like on the spring equinox, just take 10 or 15 minutes out and think about, hey, I've just made it through winter, right? What did I learn about myself in winter? How did this winter treat me? What was happening at that point? And if the spring equinox is all about balance, you could just think about like, what is balance going to look like now moving forward into spring, right? Is there something in my schedule? Is there something in my work? Is there anything that's happening where I could use more balance? Sometimes it's just knowing the themes of what's happening and the energy of what's happening and then thinking, how can I apply it to like my personal life?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I feel like I've been under a rock for 3 months,
Yeah.
in all honesty.
So first
Uh,
move the rock. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm like an extreme type A personality, right?
Yeah.
So I am constantly go, 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 go. And I have learned, during the winter of this year, like, it has been really nice to just give myself permission to do kind of a reset.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely starting to get a little antsy. I'm not
Mhm.
gonna lie. Like, I'm
Mhm.
ready. I'm ready for the sunshine. I'm ready for the warmth. This even the rain.
Mhm.
Those fun like not crazy thunderstorms and severe weather, but I do
Mhm.
love a good thunderstorm and the rain and watching all of everything green up and all the buds come out. Like, I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
And especially after this winter, because this winter has been brutal in Michigan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it's interesting because it's also like I'm noticing, because I work in real estate, real estate kind of follows that same cycle too,
Yep.
right? Like things are really slow in the winter time. You have all the holidays, people are distracted, nobody wants to go out and see houses when it's, negative 30 degrees and
Mhm.
the snow is blowing sideways.
Yeah.
Um, so it's kind of nice to like get to the point now where I'm starting to see more homes are listing and more people are starting to call and I'm getting more and like I am more, I would say, motivated to start the reaching out and putting the plans together
Mhm.
and getting things in motion right now. Um but I think it is I'm definitely more aware of the like nature cycle this year than I've
Mhm.
ever been, and it's been super intriguing to me because like you said, a lot of people maybe not don't even notice the shifts because we're just so used to living
Mhm.
and doing our day to day, and it's not something that we intentionally think about. But I think when you start to intentionally think about it, you start to really realize like how true it is,
Mhm.
um when things just naturally kind of start to progress in ways
Mhm.
that they do. I don't know, I just
Well,
really it's really fascinating to me.
and I think we have to zoom out, solar system, galaxy level here because everything is energy. Like
Mhm.
we are made up of the same energy as the trees and everything else and space and who knows what is out there. But everything is that energy. We just think that we're separate from it because that's what we've told ourselves. That's how humans have now positioned themselves, whatever else. But so to your point, like there is truth around real estate picking up right now, right? Gardening starts picking up. People are all excited to literally and figuratively plant seeds and to get thinking about what they're going to grow, what they're going to bloom, right? You have people wanting to like start thinking about spring break, right? They're ready for that, like that weather and that warmth. Um, that energy at a basic level, astrology is a language of energetic expression. That's what I always tell people when I'm doing readings or anything
Mm.
like that. Our solar system and the planets, it's all energy. We are energy. It's all just about energetic expression. And so we see that energetic expression happening in very practical, real world, tangible ways, but we don't necessarily connect it to maybe the natural world or to what's happening in the sky or to anything else, right? We just go about our days being like, yeah, well, real estate picks up in spring. Well, why is that? Right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Or if people are like, yeah, spring break, let's go. Why is that? Right? Like there's all these things that if you start thinking about them differently, it's like, got it. Cause the energy is there to do something, to move, to start shifting from where we were in winter. And that's where not only just the spring equinox, but that's, where the astrological calendar starts coming into play and everything. So yeah, I just, yeah, it's so obvious when you start looking at it, but we're not conditioned to look at it that way. Not everybody, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think there's certainly people out there that I think have a misunderstanding of astrology
Mm-hmm.
and don't really understand really what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that putting it in the context of how astrology is energy, as it's
Mm-hmm.
energetic, and it has to do with the elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
energy that we work with really kind of it gives me a whole different perspective
Mm-hmm.
of how things cycle,
Mm-hmm.
how those emotions and elements bring different emotions and different energies at different times of the year.
Mhm.
Certainly something that I've never really considered until like this past year. So
Yeah, yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah, well, it's yeah. But you're right, like, I as an astrologer, when people just think of astrology as, like, pop horoscopes and, you know, whatever, yeah, I get it, and to be fair, like, I loved checking out the astrology in the newspaper or the
Oh
back of the
yeah.
Cosmo magazine as a kid, and you're like, "When
Yeah.
is my love gonna show up?" You know, all the things,
Yeah.
like, I get
Yep.
that. And there's still a lot of that that happens today, right? Where like astrology back in the day, like up until the 17th century, it was like an academic thing. You know, you have people throughout history that had astrologers as their right hand people, you know,
Mhm.
because it was this, yeah. And I'm not trying to convince anybody that like you have to believe in astrology. Some people never will, and that's fine. Totally get it.
Mhm.
I love it. It's a big
Mhm.
part of my life. But it was in like the 17th century or so when it started to lose its credit as a science or as a part of academia and was transitioned more to like pseudoscience, because that's what we were also starting to realize what science looked like, right? We were starting more in exploration. We had data, there was more research, just this that side of science was happening. So anything that wasn't that meant that it was pseudoscience. And
Mm.
because astrology has also kind of been something that's relatively abstract, it's like, well, unless you can prove it, then
Right.
it's not real, right? And so, and I get where, I mean, I love data, I love science, I love facts, right? Now more than ever. And there's also part of it that's like, well, this has been around for thousands of years. And if you
Mhm.
start to look at it at a very basic energetic level like that, it's hard for me. It would be hard for someone to convince me that it doesn't have some accuracies. And especially like when I've done chart readings or when I'm looking outside at the seasons and what, you know, we're feeling and what we're noticing in the natural world, you start connecting those dots and it's really, really hard to not see those dots connected.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you read my chart, I was blown away because a lot of the things that you were talking about are things that I've personally have experienced,
Hmm.
or you were able to describe like a lot of elements or pieces of my personality. And I was just like, that's wild that you
Hmm.
can just look at somebody's chart and you can know like they've got, a lot of air, or they've got a lot of water, or they're
Hmm.
balanced, or whatever, however you look at that. So
Hmm.
I agree with you. I've always loved astrology, and I was always loved looking at Cosmo, and you know the exact same thing as you, but I look at it differently now,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's just, yeah, it's really awesome.
Well, and I think the other thing that's worth mentioning is that like there's astrology for our understanding of self. And that's I love astrology for that. And when I'm working with people, like that is the angle that I really enjoy taking as a almost kind of like a permission slip to be who we are, right? And we come into this world and we are a perfect being. And then through life we get conditioned and there's experiences and we're making decisions and all of that stuff is very valid. And
Hmm.
sometimes we end up forgetting or not really knowing who we are because all this other stuff has come into our lives and happened and whatnot. And so for me, astrology ends up kind of being that helpful, personalized kind of not necessarily a map because it's not saying, hey, go this direction, but this understanding of, oh, if this is how I express myself in these situations, right? And I use the term express myself, not just speaking or ideas or whatnot, but if this is how I express myself in these situations, and that's like mirrored in my birth chart, then maybe I don't have to try to be something different, right? Maybe this
Yeah.
is who I am and I get to accept that and not as an excuse to like be an asshole or something, right? Not as um it's not an excuse, but it's like validation in who we are. And I think it's been a helpful tool for me when it's understanding that, especially as someone who's constantly who has in the past like other people's opinions and people pleasing and all of these things, and it's like I don't even know who I am. Like if I had to make a decision about stuff, I don't even know what I do because I was always looking to other people instead of like having some trust and faith in my own abilities. And I think
Mhm.
astrology helped me actually understand those layers and give myself some of that credit.
Yeah.
At the same time, if that is not somebody's jam, that's okay. The astrological seasons, like you can use the seasonality of things just as a helpful gauge as you're navigating the rest of the seasons. Because at the beginning of this episode, I had said like every season has 3 astrological seasons within it, right? So even if you never want to go in and look at your own chart or understand your own astrology, you could also just think about, okay, Aries season is when the astrological year kicks off, is when the spring equinox, like, what does that actually mean? What are those themes associated with it? And how do I see that in my life? Right. And is it helpful if I want to tap into more of that? Is it helpful to know what those themes are and to see what's happening around me in the natural world so that I can incorporate it into my life when I need it? Right. Same
Mhm.
thing like when Gemini season rolls around, if you understand the themes and associations of Gemini, right? They get a bad rap. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a Gemini sun, but like there it's perspective, right? It's communication, it's connection, it's thought. It's if you think about that stuff during that season, it's like, great. If those are things that I want to be mindful of or things that I want to think of in my own life, how can I tap into that energy a little bit or at least just understand what that energy is about and maybe give myself some time during that month, during that season of spring to think about it and to sit with it a little bit, right?
Mhm.
So I think the astrological seasons, there's overlap obviously between someone's personal astrology and the and the astrological seasons because the underlying pieces are the same, right? The expressions and the associations and the themes of each sign are there whether it's personal or seasonal. But if you want to if it's an easier way to like start thinking about the seasons and you don't just want to think about the 4 seasons because you know that you feel differently at the beginning of the spring than you do at the end of spring, the astrological seasons can be a nice kind of breaking things down into a smaller piece to kind of sit with those as the seasons unfold and then transition to the next.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I definitely think, it if you could just, encourage people to just be more intentional of, recognizing some of the things that are happening. I think that
Yeah.
goes a long way in kind of understanding, like, what nature is trying to tell us and
Hmm.
how can we, like, I don't know, I don't wanna say make decisions or go along with life in the way that nature does, but it's certainly something that has been a lot has been around so much longer than we have. If we
Yeah.
start paying more attention to it, I think there's some wisdom that can be learned from that.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I definitely notice a shift towards it. And I think, especially now, we are so disconnected from
Mm,
nature. And you see that
mhm.
based on the decisions that we're making in our world and how that has an impact on the natural world. Right. And I think at a very basic level, I hope that as more people pay attention to the seasons and intentionally try to work with them or think about them or notice them, there's also a new way that they're looking at them, the natural world as a whole. And maybe there's more respect towards it, right? Maybe we start
Mhm.
making decisions that, hey, how am I showing up? What am I standing for? What am I supporting that is going against the natural world and or going in support of it, you know? And
Yeah.
I think it's hard to make those decisions when we're not actually paying attention to the natural world. So my hope is that people start paying attention to it more, um, so that we can, embrace it more, make decisions for it, steward it more, that whole thing. Because we as humans, I think, have feel pretty confident saying this, that we just feel like we own it all, right? And that's not the case. And I think it's
Yeah.
gotten us into a lot of trouble and it will continue to get us into trouble because we don't have another place to call home. I don't care what the tech bros want to go do and where they want to live. And if they want to go to Mars, that's fine. I'm not interested in that. So
Yeah.
that's a totally different, tangent. Maybe we'll discuss that another time. But paying attention to the natural world helps us foster a respect and an understanding and an appreciation for the natural world. Um, And astrology and the cycles and seasons and all of that is a part of the natural world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And
So
I really haven't like enjoyed listening to this. It's funny. I like these quarterly updates on, what's happening in the
yeah,
cosmos and how they all relate to nature and the
yeah.
stars and everything because it forces me to actually think about things differently, right? To get more
Mhm,
intentional on the things that I'm doing. And
mhm,
um yeah, I think people like if they're so inclined should maybe think a little deeper about it,
mhm,
and really pay attention to what's happening. I think
mhm.
you never know what'll come out of it, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, okay, and so I wanna do, like, a shameless plug here that isn't really even shameless. I'm just gonna plug this. Um, because if people are interested in this sort of stuff. Like, I mean, this is the work that I do. So I offer astrology readings if people want to understand their chart. But I also, on my Substack, this is the stuff I'm writing about every week. Like, literally every week, I'm writing a reflection around what's happening in our world on a walk. What am I noticing? And tying it to the energy of the astrology that we're in so that it's a way for people to start thinking like, "Oh, what am I noticing maybe?"
Mhm.
Right? Because again, if that
Mhm.
first step is just noticing. So that's the kind of stuff that I write about every week on my Substack. And also the seasonality of it. Like I'm actually well, we're recording this on Monday. So Tuesday, I have a like a spring overview that's kind of coming out that talks a lot about this stuff too. So if people want to think about how can I start doing this in a way that isn't adding more to my plate, right? It's just helping me to start paying attention maybe on a level that I haven't before. These are the sorts of things that I write about on my Substack, and there's a couple different things that I offer there. Or just even on like my website, like there's stuff I write about on my blog and whatnot. So if people are curious, that's a wonderful way that, obviously helps support the work that I do, but also just as like a starting point if it's something they're interested in without all of the like, you have to do this, you have to do that. And it's just
Mhm.
human, right?
Well, and I will attest because you did my elemental astrology chart, which I thought was fascinating. I loved like learning and seeing that whole process, and I loved it so much. I even got one for my niece, and got to listen in on hers. So I will give you the shameless plug as
Oh,
well,
thank
Becca.
you.
Like anybody out there that wants to have their chart done, get in touch with Becca because it's really fascinating. I can tell you, like I learned a lot about myself, and I've actually been able to apply some of those things that I've learned, um, that I guess I never really noticed before.
Mhm,
Um, and like you had said earlier, there's certain tendencies that we have as humans, and sometimes it gives us a little more permission to just be who we are and to be
mhm,
okay with it instead of trying to go against the grain, right?
mhm. Yeah.
um so make sure, Becca, make sure people know like what your website address is,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you'll put it, in the in the links,
Yeah.
to this episode and stuff. But I think that I'm in agreement. Like if you're interested in any of this, you should definitely check out Becca's work because it's really fascinating.
I appreciate that. And I love what you said, like the fact that you were able to actually apply things because for as much like I love this stuff. And also, we live in a practical modern world where we have to show up and do work, where we have to be in relationship with one another. We've got to pay the bills and all this stuff. And a lot of this, again, is abstract. And so my goal is always to take something that's abstract and make it actually applicable for people in their life. So that in the readings or whatever I'm writing, it's how can you actually take this and do something with it and apply it so that it isn't just left up to theory or whatnot, but that there's opportunity with it.
Mhm.
Um, because if we learn about ourselves, right, then we can also learn how to show up in our lives in a way that not only feels true to ourselves, but also allows us to connect with others. It allows us to, so there's a lot of layers to it, but I think what you had said, understanding yourself and not trying to go against the grain of who we are, and also knowing how to like, if I know what my natural communication style is and how that energy expresses, then I also know what that's gonna look like in conversations with people and how to adapt to that kind of stuff, right? Because I think at the end of the day, the goal is to connect with others outside of
Yeah.
ourselves, you know?
Yeah.
So, So yeah,
Yeah.
I appreciate that, Cammie. That was
Yeah.
a fun one. I love doing readings. It's like, yeah,
I know.
they
I
get me
know.
geeked.
You light up when you do them. It's
I do.
definitely like something you love to do and you're really good at it. So
I
I think
appreciate it.
more people need to know where to find you. So
Thanks. I'll drop it all in the show notes because it's funny when I talk with people, they're always like, I didn't know you did that. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not like super good at promoting it, even though I have all this experience in marketing. Like marketing yourself is hard, but yeah, I'm getting better
yeah.
at it.
I
So
love it. Awesome. Well, I think that probably should wrap up the show. A great
yeah,
ending point, Get in
perfect.
touch with Becca.
Call me.
Call
Just
Becca.
don't
Get
call
your
me.
chart done.
Actually, like shoot me a DM or like fill
It'll
out a
change your
form.
life. It'll change your life.
That's my goal.
Yeah. Well, everybody, thanks so much for listening again today. I know we always say if you like this episode or something resonated with you and you think that maybe it would resonate with somebody that you know, be sure to share it with them. And with that, I guess we'll say goodbye until next week.
See you later.
See ya.